Hey, welcome to our online church service. My name is Josh Carsonson. I'm the lead pastor here, and I just wanted to say thank you for joining us and checking us out. If you are newer to Northwest Hills and you're just trying to see what we're all about, this is a really cool, easy avenue to watch, to see what's happening, and this is a nice first step to joining us on a Sunday. If you are a part of our church family and you're very familiar with us and you are out of town for the weekend, you got a fun vacation, you got a job thing, or you're sick and you can't make it on Sunday, what a cool way that you can watch a church service later throughout the week. But if this is something that you're doing in replacement of Sunday morning gathering, we would just encourage you, as Scripture says, don't forsake the weekly gathering. Join the people. This gathering where we're worshiping God, where we're hearing from His Word, where we are connecting with one another is really pivotal to what it means to belong to a church. And so we would invite you, come on a Sunday morning. Again, thank you for joining us. We hope that you enjoy this service as it helps you in your process of loving Jesus, living like Jesus, and making Him known.
Good morning. Let's grab a seat. If you brought a Bible with you, we'll be in the book of Ruth. Man, yeah, someone's excited about a 4-page book this week after we're just plowing so far. So, man, if you are new to our church, we're doing something that we've never done before. We are reading one book a week through the Bible, basically a book a week. We're preaching on it on Sunday, so I can kind of give like a survey of it in some ways, kind of a preview, and we just ask you, hey, read it this week. And the primary heart behind that is multiple faceted, but primarily is like, we want you to be self-feeders. Like, we recognize Sunday mornings are important. It's crucial. We got to gather to hear what God's word is all about and to worship and to sing and to put our hearts before Him. But we cannot rely primarily on Sunday mornings for our faith, right? Like, it's something that we have to own individually. And so we're trying to encourage you read throughout the week. And so we have a journal that we've published that goes with the reading. If you don't have one and you have no idea what I'm talking about, go grab one in the lobby. They're an orange book. Someone around you has one. Right? Someone right here. One person, my wife. Okay, thank you, Megan. I have one friend in here and a few other staff members. Great. And some more. Okay, it's been a good weekend. Yesterday, I don't know that everyone knows, but we have a pastoral resident. His name's Jacob Mills. He has been a part of our kind of core staff lead team meeting every week, and he's a younger guy trying to figure out where he wants to fit into ministry. And yesterday, he got married. Super fun. I got a picture, him and his wifey up there. So Jacob and Mariah, you will see Jacob here on January 1st, the day that the other staff don't want to preach. So he'll be preaching. You can get rid of that picture. No, he's just awesome guy, heart for the Lord. You'll be seeing him throughout the year, but super sweet to have that wedding. And then the tailgater was great. Yours truly, JJ, the guy who was just singing, he was, Gary talks about there was a hot tub with many people. JJ sat in the hot tub for 3 hours last night. And it was our baptismal, so we literally brought it outside. I took some pictures, but JJ wouldn't let me put them up on screen, which I felt like isn't quite fair. Since I'm your boss, I should be able to do that, but it's okay. Just joking. You're awesome. Family Sunday. It's a great day to talk about families. And particularly in the book of, I honestly never connected that this was Family Sunday, so this is just God's providence and how He works. But we're going to talk about family today in a kind of a unique way. And family is both incredibly beautiful and really hard. Right? I don't consider myself much of a crier. I'm like a once a year, I'll cry, a couple tears a year, maybe every other year-ish. My wife's looking at me like, is that true? Every couple years, every year? I don't know. Maybe for a guy that's a crier. I don't know. It doesn't feel like I'm a crier. But a couple weeks ago, I found myself kind of fighting back a few tears. We heard of a kid through a connection that we have who did not have a home. And this is a kid who is kind of the same age as one of my daughters. And just the thought of someone in our town not knowing where I'm going to go to bed the next night, not having a mom and dad that are anything like what I grew up with, it's just one of those thoughts. You're like, that is beyond brutal. It's horrible. Like how is this kid even supposed to function and think about math in school when they don't know what the next week looks like? And so kind of praying through that, and thank God it seems like they were able to be placed in a good home, which is awesome. But like the last couple weeks, my heart's just been heavy for this child, just thinking through like, how do we love on people who don't have a family? And this theme just keeps coming up. 2 weeks ago, we had a dessert in this room, cleared out the tables, and some of you guys know Brian and Barb Hoffman. They lead an organization called Embele Ministries, and what their ministry organization does is they have partnered with a number of orphan students in Africa and trying to get them all the way through kind of trade school education and get them up on their feet. And they recently had the opportunity to go over there, and they took a bunch of video of these kids. And so most of these kids, we were able to watch a video and kind of hear their story. And so you're sitting here in this nice, heated, like we're all in nice, comfy clothes, eating desserts, and you're reading or you're listening to stories of kids who are like, I come from nothing. Like I even less than nothing. Honestly, I was talking to Brian and Barb after first service because I didn't tell them I was going to say this. And they said, not only are a lot of our kids orphans, a bunch of our kids, it's even worse than being an orphan when your mom and dad say, I don't want you, and kick you out, like as a young kid. Like they come from absolutely broken homes. And so just the heaviness of that the last couple of weeks. And then last week we were launching our generosity campaign. And if you were here last week, you kind of heard about that. If you've been around Northwest Hills for the last decade, this is something that our heart has been very much aligned with. We sponsor students who have nothing, who come from nothing. We give them education. We give them all kinds of things just to make their life function. And so we're kind of looking at that, and my heart just goes to the many conversations I've had with these kids, because I've had the opportunity, the privilege really of being able to go over to Uganda multiple times. In fact, JJ and I went 1 year together, and a number of other people in this room have been there. But to know these kids, right, to sit in a small group for multiple years with the same college-age students and to say, hey, tell me about your life, and here's who God says you are, and here's, how you can move forward. It's not simple. It's not easy. And I can think of stories, I can think of conversations I've had with some of these young boys who, under Joseph Kony, were forced to be child soldiers. Right, and being a child soldier, being forced to do things that you cannot even imagine. And I've had conversations with young men just bawling to me saying, I was forced to do this as a young kid. Right, I've had conversations with many of these gals who have been abused in horrible ways that I'm not even going to go into, but just taken advantage of by people who should protect them. And you think about all the weight that happens in families that are broken, and there's not one of us in here who doesn't feel like those things are so wrong. Right? There's not one of us in here who doesn't have a picture in our mind of what we think should happen to everyone as it relates to our family. Like we can all conjure up a picture and an image of, man, this would be nice if my family looked like whatever. But here's the truth. Like we will not experience a deeper pain than pain that regularly comes through our families, right? Through either things that have happened to us or for things that we long to happen for us that didn't happen to us. And these are stories that happen over and over and over. And it's the whole story that we've read so far in the Bible. Right, you think about this, we are, 7-8 weeks in so far. I've read every single page or listened to it. I think we're a few thousand years in. I think some 478 pages if I'm not mistaken. And this is what I read when it comes to family. Right? You go to the first family, Adam and Eve. They've got 2 sons, Cain and Abel. Cain kills Abel, first family. Right? You want to talk about a hard small group? Yeah, I used to have 2 kids. Right? And one of them killed the other. One of them's gone, the other one's banished. You want to talk about like, where did I mess up on that? Like you have to think somewhere Adam and Eve are going like, I thought we tried to parent well. I don't know what happened. Right? In that story, it just repeats itself again and again and again. You go to Noah, right? And we all think of the animals and the ark. But you think about like the family dynamics that had to take place there when like the entire earth is destroyed. Like you're talking his brothers and sisters and nieces and nephews and heaven forbid his parents perhaps. And you're going like, where's the weight and guilt that comes along with like, I'm surviving, everyone else is dying. And then when I do survive, I get a lot of hardship with my kids in the future as well. Right? That story just continues. You know, you get Abraham, and Abraham couldn't have kids forever, and that's painful. Right? He eventually has a kid with someone who's not his wife, and I'll tell you, that'll bring drama. Right? And then he has a kid, and that kid, he goes through all kinds of hardship, and he and his wife can't get pregnant, and finally they get pregnant, and God, when she is pregnant with twins, says, in your womb there are two nations, and they're going to be at war with one another. You're like, how about in your womb you got two best friends? Right? Like, wouldn't that be so much nicer? And God's like, no, you got two nations who are going to be at war with one another. And that story continues, and one of these sons is at war with the other. Then one of them has 12 sons, and you read that his favorite wife died in childbirth, which is problematic sentence, right? First of all, having a favorite wife is a problem. And then she dies in childbirth, and then you get 12 sons, and one of them is sold into slavery by the other sons. And like, that's dramatic, that's problematic. The story literally just continues over and over. You get Moses, and you know, a big story that we've read so far has been Moses, and Moses' brother, you know, builds the golden calf and tries to get all his people to worship something else. And you want to talk about being mad at your brother. Thanks for that one, Aaron. And then you get Joshua, right? The leader that I preached on recently. And Joshua, in the book of Joshua, we read nothing about his family at all, which like maybe is okay, but like if there's nothing about your family, maybe your work-life balance is somewhat out of whack, like somewhere in there. He's out just conquering all the time, and we read nothing about his family. History outside the Bible tells us that perhaps he married Rahab, the prostitute, which, if that was true, I promise you would bring some baggage and some family drama. Then you get to the Judges, and you get 400 years of everyone doing what's right in their own eyes and all kinds of family drama and problems. And again, we've yet to read the story of here's mom and dad, and they have 4 kids, and they all love each other, and they go to church together, and like dad's on the serve team, and son's on like the donkey parking team, and everyone's just like happy to be together, and they like alternate, you know, Sunday brunches at everyone's family farm, and they watch like the sunset, you know, wooden picture on the front porch every Sunday evening. Like, you don't read that story. We have never read that story, but we want to read it, don't we? Like, we all want to, especially as like Thanksgiving's coming up. Like, we all want it, but it's not there. Why not? We're going to read in the book of Ruth, though, I think a beautiful picture of reality. Because in the book of Ruth, we're going to see in 5 verses all kinds of family drama and hardship. But we're going to see what happens when God works through it. And we actually do get a little happy ever after today, which is beautiful. It's temporary, but we're going to see God, we're going to see the father heart of God stepping into a family today. And we're going to see what God does to a family who's in the middle of all kinds of hardship, who's in the middle of all kinds of loss, and he's going to say, I see you in your mess. I see you in the things that you've done. I am for you. I am with you. And we're going to see it in ways that I think are really helpful to you and I, because it's not like the rest of the Bible that we've read so far, because most of the Bible that we've read so far, really most of us have a hard time relating to, and here's why. I've never stood foot on like the edge of a lake and God just go, whoom, and split the thing and I walk down the aisle. That has not happened. Right? As I'm thinking out loud, though, one time my wife and I were backpacking and we were at a lake and it was so foggy you literally couldn't see your hand in front of you. I kid you not. I've told this story in here. You guys know this. I prayed, God, would you please let us just see this lake? Instantly, I say amen. I kid you not. The clouds completely open for about 15 seconds. We see the whole thing and then it just sucks right back in. So maybe I have seen something like that, but that wasn't my point. My point was I don't ever see things like that. And my point is, even though my name is Joshua, like God does not say to me, hey, on Monday, I want you to walk around the city. And then I want you to do it again on Tuesday and on Wednesday. And then next Monday, I want you to go 7 times and then watch as the walls fall down. Like, that's not how my life works. Right? Like, we're going to see how God works through what we might dare call the mundane. like the normalcy of our family drama and brokenness, and we're going to see a God who invites us to work into the mess of other people. So today, I want you to hear this, that God has a plan to bless your family. He absolutely does, and that Satan has a plan to curse your family, and we get to choose, am I going to bring blessing or am I going to bring cursing? Because here's the deal, what we do today will affect generations to come, and we're going to see this today. We're going to see what happens when a family chooses to obey, and what happens to generations to come, and what happens when we choose to do whatever we want to, and see what happens to generations to come. And we're going to see this through the book of Ruth. So if you got it, would you open up to Ruth chapter 1? Would you stand with me? I'm just going to read the first 5 verses. When I'm done, I'm going to say, this is the word of the Lord. You're going to say, thanks be to God. And we are going to run a little bit late today, and that is okay. Ruth chapter 1, verse 1. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab. He and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab, and they remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. They lived there about 10 years, and both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You can grab a seat. So, almost exactly a year ago, we went through this book. I think we did it in 10 weeks. Here's our best shot in 20 some odd minutes. The first 5 verses are absolutely devastating. Within the first 5 verses, you get loss that's unbelievable. You get loss not only of like livelihood because of drought, you've got loss of a spouse, like you've got breaking of God's commandments, and you've got loss of multiple spouses, leaving 3 women without any sort of protection, really wondering, God, not only where are you, but what do we do to move forward? And so what I want to do with our time is I want to make kind of 3 observations about what was going on in the family, and then I want to see what I'm just going to call the father heart of God and how he responds coming after this, starting in verse 6. So let's look at 3 things, though, when it comes to this family. The first thing I'm going to say is that they were in the middle of what appears to be generational hardship. Now, you and I, the way that we live is we're not completely autonomous to the families that we come from. Right? We don't get to choose the families that we come from. We don't get to choose the history of my parents. I didn't get to choose the history of my grandparents. And that was what was going on in this story, right? Because in chapter 1, verse 1, we read that they were in the middle of a famine. Now, famine's important here. And we got to understand the context of why famine's important. In order to understand that, we got to go all the way back to the book of Exodus, where Moses has this pretty beautiful, powerful, strange encounter with God. Right? Because if you go back to Exodus chapter 34, and we remember the moment where Moses has brought the people out of slavery, he's meeting with God up on the mountain, the people are rebelling, they're building the golden calf, Moses comes back down the mountain, and God essentially says, I'm out. Like, guys, what are you doing? I've rescued you, I've saved you, you quit following me, you created this golden calf, I'll give you what I promised you, but I'm not going with you. Right? This is a theme that we've talked about here in the last couple months. Ultimately, Moses responds to God and he says, God, if you don't go with us, it's not worth going. I can have the job, I can have the friends, I can have the house, I can have the whatever, but if you're not with me, life's not worth living. And he makes this, and Moses pleads with God, God, go with me. And God says, okay, I'll go with you. But it wasn't enough just that God said, go with me. Moses is like, okay, I hear your words, but I want more than that. God, I need some sort of deposit. I need some guarantee because I really don't want to do this without you. He's like, God, I want to see you. No one has ever seen you. I want to see you face to face. And God says, you can't see me face to face. You will die if you see me. But he hides him in the cleft of a rock and he passes by. And in the passing by, God responds and he says, this is who I am. This is my nature and my character. And we've talked about this. We've talked about the reality when God says, like, I am slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love. But at the end of that, listen to what he says. This is Exodus chapter 34. I'll just pick it up right in verse 6. God says, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. Right? So this is all good news so far, keeping steadfast love to thousands. It's like, okay, God, you are with us, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin. But here he says this, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. But I love that first part. That's like God, he's saying, I'm going to be patient, I'm going to be kind, I'm going to be gracious. But he says, if you don't obey me, like it's going to be hard for you. It's going to be hard for your kids. It's going to be hard for your kids' kids and your kids' kids' kids. And then about 40 years later, Moses is on the edge of the promised land in the book of Deuteronomy, and he's speaking to the people before they're about to go, and he knows he's going to die because God won't let him go in. And he's speaking to this people, and in Deuteronomy chapter 11, he makes this. I'll just read it. I want to summarize. I'll just read. Listen to what he says in Deuteronomy 11. He says this about obeying God. He says, and if you will indeed obey my commandments that I command you today, to love the Lord and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul, he will give you rain for your land in its season. He's like, this is what's going to happen. You're going to go into the land. And if you obey him, he talks about like the flourishing of the land. He talks about, hey, there will be water regularly. Your fields will get whatever they need. Your animals will thrive. Your people will get all the provision that they need. But if you don't, if you do not, take care lest your heart be deceived and you turn aside and serve the other gods and worship them, right? And fill in whatever God you want to, your little God of entertainment, your little God of you, then the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and he will shut up the heavens so that there will be no rain. And the land will yield no fruit, and you will perish quickly off the good land the Lord is giving you. So I know that this is specific to this context. I know it's a specific promise and covenant that he has made to this people, but the promise was, hey, if you obey me, I'm bringing rain. And if you don't, I'm shutting it down. And so generations before do not obey him. God shuts off the rain. And now here is Naomi. Here is her husband. They are living off the consequences of generations before them. They're in the middle of drought. They're in the middle of a land where they're going, I don't know how we're going to live. I don't know where my food's going to come from because of the sins of people before me. And you and I know what that's like. Right? Here's the reality. Some of us grew up in just like amazing families where mom and dad just loved you dearly, where your siblings were always proud of you and were always encouraging. Right? The other 99% of us like grew up with, let's just say, a picture that may not have quite been perfect. Right? Some of us grew up in absolute chaos. We have no idea what it's like to have a mom and dad who love me. We have no idea what it's like to have a dad who says, this is how you lead a family. We have no idea what it's like to a mom that's like, I'm fully engaged in you and life. And man, we are products of generations that come before us. And we don't get to decide that. Like no one gets to decide the family that we're born into. We don't get to decide where we're born. And the reality is a lot of us are lacking a lot of tools because of what was or wasn't done in the generations before us. But here's the thing, we have a decision to make now. Do we just say, well, this is my lot in life? Do we just say, well, this is who I am because I didn't get it from whoever came before me? And do we just say, I'm going to figure out how to plow on? Or do we lean into the Lord and say, God, show me who you are and let me start fresh and let me start new? Right? Ultimately, we're going to see a family who kind of decides, I'm going to kind of do what we want to do. And I'm going to lean on my own strength, and let's see what happens. Observation number 1, generational hardship. Observation number 2, disobedience. I'm going to call this both generic disobedience of the family and just specific disobedience. I'm going to call it generic because sometimes like we're in a situation where there aren't any apparent good options in front of us. All right, let's be honest. If you're this young family, if you're Elimelech and you're in the land where there's drought, and God has told you, I don't want you to leave, because if you go to another country, chances are you're going to be assimilated into that culture, and you're going to leave everything that you know here, the people who love me, and as you're assimilated into this other culture, you're going to be assimilated into the worship of their gods, which ultimately are going to lead you to a life that you don't want because you're worshiping something that is not good. But here you are. What do? You think like, all that is in front of me is death. Like, if there's no food, what's going to happen to my family? So they have to make this really hard decision. And I call this generic disobedience because they're saying, well, maybe God will have something for me over here. And so they go over there, but then they go specific disobedience. Right? And specifically, God has told these people, I do not want you to intermarry. Right? And this had nothing to do with race and everything to do with worship. You go back to Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 3, and I want you to hear these words. No Ammonite or Moabite may enter the assembly of the Lord. Even to the 10th generation, none of them may enter the assembly of the Lord forever, because they did not meet you with bread and with water on the way. So here's this nation coming out of Egypt, and they come across these two kind of tribes, and these tribes do not help them. In fact, they try to war against them, and God says, okay, curse you forever. Verse 6, you shall not seek their peace or their prosperity all the days forever. And so here they've not only moved to this land, but now we're going to start intermarrying. And so their two sons take on Moabite wives, blatantly disobeying what God asks them to do, which is, again, it's going to cause some family history. It's going to cause some drama. It's going to cause a lot of hardship. And God has asked them not to do this. And we know what it's like to disobey. We know what it's like to be put in a situation where it doesn't seem like there's a good path moving forward, but I'm just going to do what I want to do. And we're going to see the result of what happens. Number 3, third observation is what I'm going to call just general hardship. All right, let's just assume for a minute. Let's just assume that husband dies really just by some freak accident. And let's just assume that both the sons die and there's nothing really that they did. It just happened. And so now you've got Naomi and you've got two daughter-in-laws in the middle of nowhere. You don't have community. You don't have family. You don't have worship. You have no protection, no future. You're incredibly vulnerable, potentially because of nothing that they even chose. Right? These types of hardships happen to us. Right? How often do we have hardship, not because of anything that we chose, but just because life happened? Right? I mean, how often, I was talking to someone just last week whose parent died just like that, like completely unexpected. Like these things will change your family. They'll change your life. Right? You think about just this last week and, you know, all the layoffs of people from Facebook, and I hate Facebook, and I'm kind of happy that I hope it all melts. But you have to have sympathy. I believe that with all social media, but that's not the point. You have to have sympathy, though, for 11,000 people who just lost their job like that. Right? If you're a husband and wife and you're both working somewhere and you've got a Bay Area mortgage and all of a sudden both your jobs are gone, like, that's rough. Right? You're like part of FTX and all of a sudden all your money is gone. You're like, okay. Like, that's not simple. Like, these types of things happen. Right? Just general hardship. So what do? What does God do? Here's Naomi. God, where are you? God, are you for me? What is going on? In verse 6, we're going to start to see what God does. I'm going to look at 3 things that God does and try to summarize the book, because that's part of preaching through a book. Point number 1 is God brings rain. Look at verse 6 with me for a minute. Then she, this is Naomi, arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. God didn't have to do this. He didn't have to visit this country with food. He could have just said, yeah, you disobeyed me, therefore good luck. But what does he do? He brings rain, which brings food. David says this in Psalm 103. He says, God forgives all of our iniquities. He heals all our diseases. He redeems our life from the pit. He crowns us with steadfast love and mercy, and he satisfies us with good. Now, I promise you Naomi didn't feel this way in the moment. Right? I promise you, even when she heard God brought rain, she's not thinking, I know the end of the story and I know what's going to happen and it's going to be a happily ever after. In this moment, she does not feel this way, and she explicitly says that in verse 13. Right? In verse 13, listen to what she says in chapter 1. She says, "It is exceedingly bitter for me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me." So she still feels like God is against me, even though now she's on her way back to the place where God has provided. She doesn't know the end of the story. Right? So you think about God's kindness here, and at the end of the day, like we all have been in experiences where God has been kind to us, but we all have been in experiences where we've also said, God, I don't know if you're for me. And if that's you, I want you to remember these small few words. The Lord has visited his people. The Father heart of God is a heart of kindness. And we're going to see this in this next point here, that God works through our mess. Now, think with me for a minute here. I'm going to give you a little spoiler alert. There is a happy ever after. So here's how the story goes. Naomi goes back to this land, and she goes and she takes one of her daughter-in-laws, Ruth. And Ruth makes this commitment to her. It's this powerful moment. It's kind of the apex of conversation. And Ruth says to her mother-in-law, where you go, I'm going to go. Right? Your land will be my land. Your people will be my people, because your God is my God. And God redeems this family. And here's what's so interesting to think about. God says, I don't want you to go to Moab. I don't want you to marry a Moabitess. And then God saves the Moabitess. Like, how sweet is that? Like, how sweet is it in the middle of our broken step families, half families, like all kinds of messed up relationships, God's still saying, I'm going to work through that mess to save. And I'm going to work through that mess to love you right where you are. And he does that through Ruth, and he does that through this guy named Boaz. Because what does Ruth do? She makes a commitment. She says, I've been loved by God. I'm a Moabitess. I'm supposed to be an outcast. I'm a foreigner. I'm not supposed to be known by God. And he came and he saved me. And he saved me, ironically, through someone's disobedience, which is kind of mind-blowing, and it's beautiful at the same time. Because God saved her, what does she do? She dedicates her life to saying, I'm going to be for you, my mother-in-law, who's like this cantankerous, angry, obnoxious, very normal mother-in-law. I'm just saying, sorry, I didn't mean to have a joke there. Like, she makes this beautiful commitment. And in this commitment, she says, I've been loved by God. And because I'm loved by God, I'm going to commit and love my mother-in-law and show God's love to her. Like, how sweet is that? And this is what Boaz does as well. Boaz does the exact same thing. God is kind. He works through our messes. When we were in Uganda, and our theme was this Psalm 103. We were preaching through in these small groups every single day. We kind of worked through these different sections, and we were in Psalm 103. And I remember going into one of our segments thinking, like, how are my students going to respond to this? You know, how are they going to respond to a God who's like incredibly kind and gracious and who rescues them from the pit after just hearing some of the hell that they've lived through? I want you to hear some of these words that David says in Psalm 103, and think about yourself as a student here. A student from Uganda whose parents are no longer. The Lord works righteousness and justice for all who are oppressed. He made known his ways to Moses, his acts to the people of Israel. The Lord is merciful and he is gracious. He is abounding in love. He will not always chide, nor will he keep his anger forever. He does not deal with us according to our sins, nor repay us according to our iniquities. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his steadfast love towards those who fear him. I remember asking these kids, how does this make you feel? Thinking like, man, I don't know what it would be like to be in this situation, learning about this like amazing rescuing God. And I remember one student saying, this is incredible. I know this God who loves me. And I'm kind of prodding, tell me, how do you know? He's like, here I am, like in this circle, having this conversation with you, knowing that there's people on the other side of the world who are praying for me. Like, there are people who are paying for my school who do not know me. You want to talk about being loved by God, being seen? Like, no one should love me. I should be in the bush in the middle of nowhere, yet here we are. How sweet is a God who works through our mess so that we can work through other people's messes. You know, I think about this family who took on this young girl that I talked about earlier. I think about Brian and Barb and their ministry taking on these families. And this leads to like our kind of final conclusion that as God has worked through our messes, the call in this book is we get to go and work through other people's messes. Right? That's what Boaz does. So the guy who ends up marrying Ruth, his name's Boaz. From everything that we can tell, like things are going really well in his life. He's a successful businessman. He loves the Lord. And because he loves the Lord, what does he do? He obeys the Lord. And God gave this provision to the nation of Israel. And he said, hey, when there is someone in your family who is with need, whose husband has died, take her in, marry her, love her, provide, protect, redeem her land, restore the family name. And that's what Boaz does. And I think that's what God's calling people like you and I to do. See, here's the thing. Some of us, we need a rescue. We need redemption very much like Naomi and really very much like Ruth. But some of us, here's the deal. Some of us, life's going really well, right? Like we do have a nice little family. Some of you are just so excited to go home this afternoon and jump on the couch and you're like matching onesies and watch football together. And if that's you, like great, right? But if that's you, God says, you've got a job to do. Like Boaz had a job to do. Ruth had a job to do. Your job is you're supposed to be my love to the world. You're supposed to care for those who do not have. Because where faith stops when we say, thanks, Lord, this is good. Right? Thank you. Like, thank you for my truck and my life and my job, and thank you for this nice weather, and thank you that every other year I can go to Hawaii. Isn't my life awesome? Thank you. Like, that's where faith stops. And God says, no. Like, I work through your mess, and I work through your family's mess so that you can go work through other people's mess. And so my call for us is as we think about what does it mean to be in a church, first of all, it means that we got to be honest. And when I say we need to be honest, it means like there's a moment for Ruth and Naomi where Naomi's just like, I'm bearing it all. I have nothing, got nothing to lose at this point. Right? So we got to be honest with where we are and what we long for and what we need and what we have and what we do not have. You will not get better if you don't admit that you're sick. Right? And you will not help if you don't recognize that you've been helped. You will not love if you don't recognize that someone died for you. But in recognizing that someone died for you, God's call for us is go and die for someone else. What does it look like to radically, sacrificially love like Boaz did and like Ruth did? I'm going to pray and we're going to sing a few songs and I'm going to wrap it up. But I want you to hang with me as I'm praying here. Father God, I think through this story of Ruth, and there's so many different ways to take it. But as we think about, Lord, how you worked through this family, your father heart is seen here, and you say, I see you in the middle of all this. I see you in trying to figure out on your own what life looks like, and that didn't go well. And you intervened, and you bring rain, and you restored, and you saved Ruth, and how beautiful was that? God, and as you saved Ruth, we get to the very last verse. In a verse that's echoed in the first chapter in the Gospel of Matthew, where at the end, Ruth has a kid who has a kid who has a kid who's King David. And King David has a kid who has a kid who has a kid who has a bunch more. And ultimately we get to you, Jesus. Jesus, you came through the broken Moabitess family. And if that's not a picture of you working through our mess, I don't know what is. God, I thank you that you see me right where I am and that you love me right where I am. And God, you call us to go and love others. I pray that we'd be a church that is radically committed to that. Jesus, it's in your beautiful name that we pray. Amen.